Hatturni.
Hatturni, 1445 Balboa. I see that on Thursday night there's going to be a special council meeting over at the Lane Room to discuss possible $5 million property purchase for new green space, i.e. the post office, that would fit very nicely into our downtown plan, ties into the Burlingame streetscape, yada, yada, yada. I'd like to go and listen to that, and I'd like to know that maybe in a few years I can sit in that green space and not be looking at a high-speed rail aerial construct, which will be visible because we are not really fighting high-speed rail tonight or tomorrow if we don't litigate. That's the only choice the state has left us. We have disagreements with above ground, can't get below ground, and every time you turn around, we're being told something else. I don't know if you people were invited to the Spanish delegation, but I was at the Fairmont. I'll do anything for a free lunch. High-speed rail sent out an invitation to come listen to Spanish rail. Of course, I was put on the wait list because this was a bogus invitation. They already had their invitees. I got that notice 5 minutes later. I plugged in saying, yes, I want to come listen and have my free lunch at the Fairmont. I was immediately put on a wait list, and I never got a ticket, and neither did any other person of the public. This was not public outreach. It was bait and switch scam, and that's what they're doing to us. It's all bait and switch. Take these principles and save a piece of paper and the ink that it's costing us to print them, and stow them until after the EIR program and a project, which are both being challenged, which is the only way that the public can now challenge this project. That's all they've left us. Take the few $1,000s that we put aside for high-speed rail. Spend it now. Join our sister city, Belmont, in their amicus. Because, you know, we did the story polls. They were going to put up permanent story polls, but they did us one better. They've gone to court. They've joined the 3 other sister cities that say no, no high-speed rail on the Caltrain right away. So take that few $1,000s and spend it now. What are we waiting for? My new aerial structure that I can see from our new green space, and I hope we get the post office. I don't want the elevated structure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening again. Charles Volt, 725 Vernon Way. I'd like to take advantage of this second public comment opportunity. A couple items on high-speed rail. Number one, news flash. I understand that Kirk Pringle resigned earlier. Yes. Secondly, on legislation 517-145, the word is that during the recess period, the respective staffs and perhaps the governor's office are going to be thrashing it out and getting the leadership on board so that when they resume, they'll be able to pass a bill. So now is the time to weigh in if you're going to do so. But what I'm really here to do is that I'm now in constructive problem-solving mode with respect to high-speed rail, and I'll cut to the bottom line. I'm going to suggest that you establish a rail committee like 4 of the 6 other PCC cities do. Only Burlingame and Brisbane do not have one. The other 4 do. They vary considerably in how they're composed and what they do, but it has proven to be an effective way of combining the resources the city has to address the problems. At the outset, I want to make it clear that I have no personal interest in this. I've already given the General Sherman statement. If nominated, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. But I want to give an overview, which is for a Burlingame-sized city, you are not built to handle a problem like high-speed rail. You've got your hands full with all the things you've already discussed tonight, all the planning issues, all the downtown revitalization, et cetera. And the high-speed rail problem is so large and complex that you're just not built structurally to handle it. Furthermore, the center of gravity keeps changing. You think you're just about getting on top of the problem, and suddenly it has a new dimension and a different problem. You individually, as council people, don't have the time that's needed to stay on top. Your staff doesn't have the time. And there are potential values to the city of such a committee, depending on what you want and how you structure it. The first one is it can be an information filter to deal with the fire hose of information that you get. You don't know what's reliable and what isn't, and you get some well-informed people, and they can put some things together for you that normally staff would do, but staff doesn't have time. Secondly, it can be a study group. They can research and report back to you on particular technical items. I'll give one example. Diesel, multiple units, is that a good alternative for Caltrain if high-speed rail doesn't come up the corridor? There are people that can find out about that and report back. I could mention half a dozen other ones, but time doesn't permit. And finally, it can provide a feedback group to you. And I want to say that what happened tonight was an example of we're not working effectively together, and this could have been prevented. You didn't hear anything tonight that you shouldn't have heard a week or two ago if we'd been working together. We need to work together, and this could be a constructive way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. We'll close the public comment, and we're on to old business. Item 12A on the cell phone usage guidelines, as we talked about, we are going to defer consideration of that until August 15th, our next meeting. That brings us to 12B, consideration of high-speed rail principles. And we've had a lot of dialogue on this already. I just want to say the simple goal of these principles was to put on paper something that could be a guiding policy for the council members, especially those who are going to different meetings talking about high-speed rail issues, so that we all know where we stand and we can defer to these principles when we are trying to make statements on behalf of the city. We are saying in here, basically, this is backing up the letter that we just sent, which says that we have endorsed the idea of using only the 2 tracks for Caltrain. The thought is that if this proposal were expanded to 4 tracks or just beyond 2 tracks, what we are calling for is a completely new EIR. So this is tougher than the Smitty-Gordon proposal in that it has some more statements as to how far this proposal could go. And I think the only reason to talk about this is practicality. We're talking about a proposal for saving Caltrain at this point, that it could be rescued with the high-speed rail dollars if, in effect, the current baby bullet runs are turned into high-speed rail runs. And we say specifically that we would not accept a huge number of those runs. We would consider that to be a very limited scope. But if we are going to be talking about an expanded project, I, for one, would insist that we have a completely new EIR, open up the process to different alignments, different locations, and certainly 4 tracks doesn't make sense above ground to me in any form. I think it would need to be below ground. So I'll lead off with that and ask the council for their input. Vice Mayor Deal.
Well, I've been making notes like crazy on top of the notes I made before.
Okay.
I would say that if somebody on the council wants to use this as their principles, they're more than welcome to do that. I'm not going to support that as my principles, and I'll explain the reason why. I have a problem with it. It just simply says high-speed rail projects should not create a visual or physical divide through Burlingame. That's a matter of opinion. You're going to find people who are going to find examples of a raised rail that I think is visually attractive. I think it was, who was it that said that in the audience tonight? I've forgotten. The other one, I think it specifically for me, would have to say a cut and cover. It doesn't specifically say that. The other thing I noticed on this, and there's a lot of things I did notice, and I apologize that I did not get back early enough on this. I had a lot to do, and I didn't study this as well as I should have, so you're hearing more of it tonight. One thing, for instance, all project impacts must be mitigated, and one of the mitigations must be the eucalyptus grove along the Caltrain corridor. Okay, I agree, but I've been on the Planning Commission for many years. A mitigation to the trees is small trees. If we're going to tear them down, we're going to plant some small trees. So we just, in effect, said there that we will accept the fact that they can tear down the eucalyptus trees because they've got a mitigation that they're going to give you, and that is, we're going to plant some new ones. So we will have a row of small trees there. I think there's a lot of things in here, and I just have to make it clear for myself on some of this stuff. I mean, I've listened to this when it began at high-speed rail, Prop 1A that passed 52.6% of the population on a very flimsy addressed ballot measure. And as they say, the devil's in the details.
Actually, illegally stated ballot measure, it turns out.
Okay. That's a star to my note then. As they say, the devil's in the details. Well, we didn't get any details, but boy, we sure got the devil. Then the idea was, let's go with phased implementation. And all the while, I was on the technical working group and on the PCC and listening to this change. Every meeting, we got a different story trying to placate us. You know, it was going to be context-sensitive solutions. Well, that was a farce. They were just trying to railroad us, so to speak. Not trying to make a pun, but railroad us into their own position. So, high-speed rail, yes, exactly. So then it was phase implementation. Now it's blended approach. It's the same thing. They're not giving us any details. And once again, the devil is in the details. And we've got the devil again. And they're trying to make us happy with this. Now, I am happy about a few things. A 4-track system was never going to work. If, and once again, it's if. And I think you always have to have a plan A and a plan B. And a plan B, if we've got to have high-speed rail, then it's got to be in a cut and cover, and it's got to be a 2-track system, which is going to save property values. It's going to save. It's going to be a lot less expensive to build. And if South San Francisco wants to have an elevated 4-track system, I'm happy for them. But it's not for Burlingame. And I know we've heard so much negatives about this. The auditor's report, the traffic study that we saw, not the traffic study, the ridership study. Thank you, everybody. All of those. There's so much stuff, there's a bunch of bull coming out, and it gets a little tiresome. Now, as people know, I just was appointed to the Caltrain board, which has an MOU, of course, with high-speed rail. Now, I've already had many conversations going back several months with the CEO, Mike Scanlon, about that, and with Mark Simon about that, too. I'm not for it, and I think they know that. And I think the first time I ran for that position, that's the reason I lost, because they thought, oh my gosh, this guy's against high-speed rail. I'm not against high-speed rail. It's not my plan. It's their plan. They screwed it up. I didn't do anything. But listen to their argument. And so if high-speed rail were to go through, it would have to be a cut and cover. It would have to be 2-track only. And then additionally, my big fear about high-speed rail is the cost. And the cost is so high and so dramatic that it's going to absorb all the money, transportation money, that this state is going to have for now and for a long time. And then we're going to be saddled with the fact that we are never going to get that east-west connection. One of the most valuable aspects of transportation in the Bay Area is once you get to that station, how do you get away from it? Yeah, now Caltrain is doing pretty good with the bicycle program. They've got, and Pat's going to correct this number, but it was 3,600 bikes a day? 3,600 bikes a day taking Caltrain. 8% of their ridership. So that's pretty good. But you're not going to get 100,000 people taking their bicycle on Caltrain. It's just not going to work. I just imagine this big long line with a rope connecting them all together. So there's so many things that aren't going to work. This Bay Area needs a transportation system, and the existing Caltrain is not it. It's a boutique system. And so we need to have something different. And tying ourselves to high-speed rail and hoping that they're going to get all this money so we can electrify, I think is the wrong way to go. I think Caltrain needs to go on their own and figure out where they're going to get this money and develop a transportation system about this corridor and have enough money left over for an east-west connection and a shuttle system instead of a high-speed rail that's not even going to stop in Burlingame. It's going to whiz right by Burlingame, even if it isn't a cut and cover.
Right.
So I just don't see any benefit for us. I just see negatives. So,
Right. So,
I think I'm done.
okay. And I mean, after receiving all these letters, and I feel at fault here because I usually keep on top of everything. And I mean, the first mistake was not involving our citizenry who know way more about high-speed rail than any of us. And when we first,
We know too much.
not as much as Mr. Volt. Yeah. We know too much. That's why we won't go away.
Too much, too little.
When we came up with our initial principles, and I think that was 18 months ago in the town hall format, and as I explained to people, things have changed since then. There were things that we said in that document that are no longer true, and that's why I think it's worthy to update or change them. However, I think us in a vacuum up here doing it is wrong, because I think what we did the first time is we brought everybody in and came to consensus as a community. Since that time, we've had, I think Jennifer quoted the survey, which at March was 867. It's almost tickling 1,000 at this point. People are still filling it out 6 months later. It was very clear that they agreed with our position that we made 18 months ago, that we support it only if it's underground. And as everyone has pointed out, that's not even in our new document. And so I think because we're down here in the weeds all the time, it's what Charles is saying. You know, we can't come up for the big picture. And that's, again, reminds me, that's what our public needs to do to keep us on the right page. And when we, we went on vacation and we did this. And so I would say, I think there's a lot of things that need to be said in a new document. I think it's really important that the people on the ground are part of making that document if we're going to change it after 18 months. I think we need to do it the right way. And I think some of the advice about let's wait till October and see all this new information that's going to come is a worthy one. So I don't see anything that's radically changed that we can't go out and use the old document and stand by it, other than CSS has long died, and I can't remember the other items. So I think it's really important for credibility and to get the best document that we're not doing it up here or doing it through email or whatever. I think we need to sit around a table, and I'm happy. I don't know if it's a rail committee. I think that's a great thing, a great piece of advice. I think we're kind of feeling at this point that we can rest a bit for the next battle because they're not looking at us right now. So I don't know. My mind can be changed on that. But I think it's a conversation worth having at this point. But in any effect, I think it's very obvious who the rail people are in our community. It's easy enough to bring them in as part of this process. We've done that before. Terry and I have met with them before. I just let the ball drop. I went to Tahoe for a week and wasn't thinking about my public. I'm sorry. But that would be my druthers, is to just get it right, involve the community in a format that's not this format like we did before, because this doesn't work, and talk about what our real goals are, because we're conflicted. We're all conflicted. If I had my say, I'd say I'm opposed to high-speed rail. If anyone asks me, but that's not this council's position. But maybe if we sat down and had a long meeting about it, maybe that's where we're headed. And I think the rest of the state has come to where we've been, finally. And the articles, I had sent you an email. There was a cover story in the Examiner on Sunday. And first of all, they're building their Trans-Bay terminal that won't have a train going to it, so they're feeling they're going to waste all that money. But then on the back page, it said, San Mateo County outmaneuvers San Francisco on high-speed rail. And it talked about how engaged our community is and our politicians, and how we have, essentially, San Francisco has not defended their position on it. And from what they're saying, they don't have the bandwidth. I think they're busy with, I'm not going to say circumcision, some of those other important things in their city. But the head of SPUR, which is the Research Transportation Institute, just said that don't let the perfect get in the way of the good, and he's seeing the writing on the wall that there's not going to be a 4-track train coming up the peninsula. And what Semidian is proposing is a more practical point of view. Now, there are members of our community that still say, he's got it wrong, or blended is just another word for what they're saying. So I think that's maybe not true analysis, but it is interesting. I think we have managed to be somewhat cohesive in our message, and it's resonating with people that there's really big problems with what they're proposing on, just not in Little Burlingame, but on a very wide level. So it might be time to have a powwow with our community again and see where we are, and,
Just a question for both of you and also the rest of the council. We supported the Semidian issue proposal, which if you support that proposal, you're supporting the 2 tracks as they exist and no longer are saying it can only be in a trench. So that's, I don't see how do you rationalize supporting that proposal and then saying that.
Because
I want to make some.
Okay. Then,
should we?
Yeah, go first and then she can go.
Okay. As far as the 2-track, the reality is if we have a 2-track system at grade and Caltrain does the number of trains that they would like to, let's say let's just get high-speed rail out of this. If they do the amount of trains that they want to do, there's going to have to be a grade separation, period. Okay, so let's stop kidding around and pretending that there's going to be this boutique railroad running up and down the peninsula with 80 trains a month. That's not what's going to happen unless everything fails. Okay, if everything fails, then yes, we will add this little boutique railroad. It'll be like something out of Disneyland. It'll run up and down the peninsula, and it won't be a transportation system. And they'll start building all these transportation centers around that railroad, and it'll be useless.
They are talking about grade separation, so in the Caltrain proposal, that is part of what the money would be used for. So that's
right. So you have to grade separate. To accept the 2 tracks at grade, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So it's going to have to be cut and cover or something like that.
Okay. Councilman Keegren, I think, was next.
At the last council meeting, I actually had stated publicly I had concerns with these principles. And one of them was that I didn't see a cut and cover. And I also see this as compromising just to save Caltrain. I want Caltrain to work, and I think it needs to be electrified. And grade separations would be a benefit to this city, but not on behalf of partnering with high-speed rail. I don't think it's our job to bail Caltrain out by partnering with high-speed rail. We go one direction, we think we have it set, and then we're derailed to another direction. We think that's set, we're derailed again. This has become a game of Monopoly, and I am tired of playing it. And unfortunately, when this came out in an email, I was in Tennessee. I had read it and did call the mayor, telling her my concerns, because I still didn't support it, but unfortunately it had already been mailed. So
that was the letter. That was the letter.
The letter, right. But I still wanted it to be known that I still did not agree with this. And it's vague, even though I may know the intentions, because we know this information so well, but for the average reader that's looking at this, it's vague, not create a visual or physical divide. Well, how do you define that? It's not defined. We don't even know what they're going to even show us. We're supporting something without actually seeing a project. So I think we're jumping the gun. Is there some good value in these principles? There are some, yes. But there are many things here that I don't necessarily agree with. And to me, these principles just jump the gun. I think we need to sit back a little bit and wait until we get more information and see what high-speed rail is going to do. And also, Caltrain got themselves in this position. It's not our job to bail them out, even though we want the system to improve. And, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom first before you realize, you know what, we messed up, but, let's start a new slate and see how we can do this correctly, because we are in desperate need of transportation that works. But it needs to be transportation that benefits our community. And at this point, I'm not seeing the benefits of high-speed rail. And when we're looking at revitalizing our downtown and looking at, the streetscape, improving that, high-speed rail could possibly take all that away. And after all the hard work we've put into this, and, 2 council members that have been able to get a grant to help out with this, all that work is just poof. Should we be close to a transportation corridor? Absolutely. That will revitalize our downtown. But we have to have the right transportation in order to do that. And this combination, to me, at grade, does not sit well. And I would rather see it cut and cover or completely trenched, which I know that's more than likely not going to be a possibility. So for me, the compromise is the cut and cover. And that's not even mentioned in here.
Councilman Brownring.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to propose, just in terms of driving to action, that we pend any principles. There are lots of good reasons, and I don't need to repeat them, but at the very least, waiting for the Caltrain analysis of whether 2 tracks is even feasible makes it a lot of sense. So I would like to propose that we simply pend these. I do want to answer the mayor's question with respect to the support for Simidian et al., because I don't believe the 2 are in contradiction to pend this set of, first of all, the letter very clearly, I think, and with very clearly raised questions about the underlying value proposition of high-speed rail, whether you need it, whether it can pay for itself, and all of the general issues that many of us have about the project. On the other hand, I think we have to be mindful that if high-speed rail forges ahead and forces us with an EIR that examines 4 tracks above grade, the city is going to spend tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in wasted engineering analysis and noise analysis and vibration analysis. And all of that can be prevented if the Simidian proposal of 2 tracks maximum at grade maximum gets adopted. So for me, I support the Simidian initiative precisely because it would put high-speed rail in a very ironclad box and would therefore save us both time and money. And for those reasons, I think, with respect to high-speed rail, that's the right way to approach. Whether we need to have principles to talk about any of that, I'm really not sure. I mean, I don't hear a lot of value to the principles, and I hear a lot of people who are concerned about them. So to me, that's a pretty easy cost-benefit. I just say we'll put them on the shelf. And if it seems useful to have a revised set of principles in the future, then at that point they can be pulled off. So that would be my recommendation for where we are right now.
Well, I was going to go one step further and say we postpone consideration of any principles until after the Attorney General's decision comes out, because that will rule whether it is legal, in fact, to use the Caltrain corridor at all and under Proposition 1A. So
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, if I could just say one other. I think very clearly from comments from council members and comments from the council or from the public that any statement of principles needs to make it clear that there are some principles that affect if you only do it in 2 tracks and other principles that apply if you do it in 4 tracks. And I think the fact that we didn't make that, or these set of principles don't make that distinction, caused a lot of problems. So any set in the future, I think, pretty clearly needs to make that distinction.
Yeah, and I think some of the confusion is that some of these came from an earlier document that we approved, like shall not create a visual or physical divide. We just picked that up verbatim. The mitigation stuff, we picked that up verbatim from an earlier document, and putting it into the new one didn't blend very well. So I am going to suggest that we take no action. If someone else would like to take a crack at writing some principles after these latest things, there's never going to, there is a possibility the whole thing will fall apart because of its shaky business plan and ridership stuff. But in the absence of knowing for sure what's going to happen with high-speed rail, I think we have to be very vigilant, stay at the table, and continue to lobby for the least harmful thing that we can imagine to happen in our community. So we will continue to do that. So I think that's all for high-speed rail. And now, does anyone have any other